He thought it was junk. A rust-bitten rectangle. Dead weight from a dead place. But the moment his glove touched the metal, something in him jolted awake. Listen close. This is not about luck. This is about a man, a yard full of scrap, and a box that refused to be forgotten. Michael Harris lived in loops. Alarm. Cold sink water. Staring at a face he barely recognized. Rachel pouring coffee without looking up. Their boy, James, sleeping late, half buried under a tangle of earbuds and unanswered messages. Bills on the counter. Promises in the dust. Nothing changed. Except the ache in his hands, which grew heavier every year. The yard coughed him in like it always did. Gates screaming. Trucks snorting smoke. The air tasted like old coins. Steel screeched. Hammers barked. Men cursed and laughed and pretended not to count the hours. He kept his head down. Cut. Stack. Haul. Repeat. His name never mattered to the boss. Hey. You. A finger pointing. A job thrown across the gravel like a bone to a dog. Then the truck backed up with a sound like a wounded animal. Chains clinked. A long, ribbed shape slid into view. It hit the ground and the whole yard flinched. A container. Not the bright kind you see at ports. This one looked like it had drowned and clawed its way back. Paint blistered and peeling. Hinges bowed like old knees. Corners gnawed by time. Laughter rolled across the yard. Bury it. Ship it to nowhere. Looks like a giant's coffin. Michael didn't laugh. He stepped closer instead. From far away, it was wreckage. Up close, it was wrong. Not wrong like broken. Wrong like pretending. He tapped it with his knuckles. The sound didn't echo the way it should. Too dense. Too deep. As if a second skin lay beneath the rust, holding its breath. The locks were wrong, too. Not hardware store cheap. Heavy. Military stubborn. Made for weather and men and secrets. He felt it then. A thread inside him pulled taut. A signal he hadn't heard in years. Curiosity. Danger's quiet cousin. Leave it, someone yelled. Nobody pays for junk that dead. Michael never answered. He kept looking, working the pad of his thumb over the pitted steel, the cold settling into his bones like a whisper. Something waited in there. Not luck. Not magic. Something. He heard himself ask for it before he knew he'd spoken. The container, he said to the boss. I'll take it. I'll handle breakdown. The boss didn't even look. Fine. Don't choke on it. Permission. Or a dare. Either way, the hook was set. He chained the box and dragged. Gravel fought back. The container groaned like a whale. Every muscle burned. Sweat stung his eyes. Men watched for a while, smirking, then turned away when he didn't quit. He muscled it into a far corner where silence collects. Behind the stacked pipe. Past the dead forklift with the bird's nest on it. A wedge of shadow all its own. He stood there, hands on his knees, breath knotted tight, and listened. To nothing. To possibility. He rapped the side again. There it was. That not hollow thud. Like knocking on a door that wouldn't admit it was a door. For a moment he saw himself like a stranger would. A tired man hunched over a rusted hulk, eyes too bright for the hour. Ridiculous. And yet. He went home late. Rachel had already eaten. Her plate sat cold beneath a paper towel. Busy? She asked without turning. Yeah, he said. A lie that wasn't a lie. James didn't come out of his room. A laugh leaked under the door at something on a screen. Michael stood in the hallway a second too long, then kept walking. Sleep came slow. Ceiling cracks formed continents. The refrigerator hummed a prayer for the old and tired. He tried not to think about the locks. About the thud inside the metal. About the feeling of reaching for a handle he couldn't see. He failed. Morning arrived in grey strips. He left early, before the alarm could scold him twice. Rachel asked nothing. The door clicked behind him with the soft finality of a judge's pen. Back at the yard, the day was all noise and glare. But the corner held its own weather. Cooler. Quieter. Waiting. He ran his gloved hand along the side again. Flakes of paint came away like ash. Underneath, the metal felt awake. He fetched tools. Grinder. Pry bars. Wedges. Light. The first kiss of the grinder set off a firework of tiny suns. Sparks hissed at his boots. The wheel screamed. The box answered with a deep, stubborn shiver. Rust gave. Not easily. Not politely. But it gave. He drew a line across the scarred skin, slow and steady. Another line. A square. The grinder chewed, spat, sang. Time thinned to a wire. Men came and went. Still at it. Man's chasing ghosts. He didn't bother to look up. Under the scab of oxidation, a different metal woke. Cleaner. Smoother. Not a shipping wall. Something thicker. Engineered to endure. His pulse climbed. That second skin wasn't patchwork. It was intention. He set the grinder down and listened again. The sound changed. Duller. Closer. Like knuckles on a vault. He followed seams he could barely see, tracing them with chalk, then with the flexible blade of a painter's knife, then with the conviction that sometimes guides a hand better than sight does. There, a curve. Not a hinge. A rim. He cleared more rust and found the edge of a circle. A circle set into the rectangle like a secret mouth. A hatch. Not a door for men who visit. A door for men who never meant to. He stepped back, chest rising and falling, sweat cooling in the draft that wasn't there. Around him, the yard still rattled and roared, but it felt a county away. Michael, the boss shouted from somewhere he didn't care to name. Breaks over. He didn't answer. Not yet. He slipped the tip of a pry bar into a shallow gap and felt the box resist like a clenched jaw. Whatever lay beyond that circle had been sealed on purpose. Not to keep weather out. To keep time out. To keep something in. He exhaled, long and low, and the taste of iron settled on his tongue. Remember this moment. Before the wheel turns. Before the seal sighs. Before the world tilts. Because when a dead box starts to feel like a heartbeat, you're not standing in a junkyard anymore. You're standing at the edge of a story. And stories demand a price. Dawn broke pale and tired. Michael Harris was already awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks like tally marks of a prisoner. Sleep had teased him but never truly arrived. The box haunted him. Its seams. Its weight. The way it hummed in silence, like it remembered something he didn't. He rose before the alarm. Rachel stirred but didn't speak. James was still lost in his teenage fortress of pillows and static. Michael left without breakfast, boots crunching on the frosted sidewalk. His chest felt tight, not from weariness, but from the pull of something he could not ignore. The junkyard smelled the same. Burnt steel. Grease baked into gravel. Men shouting, sparks snapping from saws. But the corner where the box crouched seemed different now. Quieter. Colder. He walked straight toward it, ignoring the jokes tossed his way. Back to your coffin, Harris. Dig deep, maybe there's a ghost in there. He didn't reply. His glove slid across the surface. Flakes of rust peeled off like old scabs. The metal underneath was stubborn, too clean, too deliberate. This wasn't junk. This was armor. He fetched the grinder. Its scream filled the yard. Sparks spat, bouncing off his boots, spraying across his shirt. The box resisted like an old soldier. Hours melted. Muscles cramped. Sweat burned his eyes. But Michael didn't stop. Every inch he cut revealed something truer than rust. A wall within a wall. A secret inside the lie. He paused only once, chest heaving, staring at the silvery gleam beneath the corroded shell. This was no shipping crate. It was a vault. By midday he'd cleared enough rust to see it. A seam, curved and unnatural. A circle hidden in the rectangle. Not welded shut. Bolted. Industrial. Military. Intentional. He touched it with trembling fingers. The hatch was sealed tight, rubber hardened like bone, bolt sunk deep into the frame. His heart hammered. This wasn't a box someone forgot. It was a box someone meant never to open again. The yard thinned out toward evening. Engines cut off one by one. Men left in clumps, laughing, cursing, their pockets heavy with day's pay. Michael stayed behind. The sun bled into the horizon. Shadows stretched long. He fetched his wrenches, set them against the first bolt. The steel groaned. His knuckles split and bled, smearing rust with red. But the bolt moved. Slowly. Painfully. It moved. One by one, he freed them. Each twist sounded like a scream swallowed by metal. Each clang landed in his chest like a bell toll. By the last bolt, he was shaking. Exhaustion, fear, anticipation, all fused into one raw hunger. He set his hands on the central wheel. It was stiff, frozen with time. He leaned, pushed, cursed, begged. It turned. A hiss escaped. Air. Stale. Bitter. Heavy with years. The box exhaled. The sound clawed through him, cold and intimate, like breath on his ear. He pulled harder. The hatch yawned open, slow, reluctant. Darkness spilled out, thick and endless. He lifted his flashlight. The beam stabbed the gloom, cutting across smooth steel walls, dust drifting like ash in the narrow space. And there, lined up with surgical precision, crates, dozens of them, wooden, reinforced with metal, each stenciled with faded markings. The light trembled in his hand. His knees nearly buckled. This was no accident. This was design. Michael crouched, half inside the opening, heart banging against his ribs. Every instinct told him to stop, to step back, to shut the hatch and walk away. But another voice whispered louder, "You found it. It's yours." He sat there until the yard was dark, until the night swallowed every sound except his breathing. When he finally pulled away, sealing the hatch again, his hand shook so badly he could barely hold the wrench. The container had spoken. Not with words. With silence. With weight. And Michael knew. He would return tomorrow. Not because he wanted to, but because the box had already chosen him. The night barely touched him. Michael lay in bed, staring into the ceiling's cracks, hearing the box breathe in his mind. Rachel turned away, her silence sharp as glass. James muttered in his sleep down the hall. But Michael was somewhere else, locked on the memory of stale air hissing from the hatch. When dawn came, it was not alarm clocks or duty that pulled him from bed. It was obsession. The junkyard greeted him with its usual chorus. Engines coughing. Steel shrieking. Men spitting laughter into the air. But the world felt muted. All noise bent around the corner where the container waited. He walked faster. His boots chewed gravel. His pulse climbed. Every step felt like a countdown. There it was. Looming, silent, it hatched disguised beneath rust and time. The others passed it without a glance. They saw trash. He saw a door. Michael grabbed his crowbar. The tool felt heavy, deliberate. He crouched before the first crate, his flashlight cutting a thin path through dust. Wood dry as bone. Metal brackets rusted, but still holding. Numbers painted in faded stencils, almost military. He pressed the crowbar into the seam. The crate resisted. The wood groaned like something waking. Sweat crawled down his neck. He pushed harder. The nail tore free with a sharp crack. The sound echoed in the chamber, too loud, like it didn't belong to the century. His chest tightened. Breath shallow. Hands trembling. Another nail gave. Then another. And the lid splintered apart. Inside lay cloth, yellowed and fragile. Bundles wrapped tight, tied with cord. He pulled one free, surprised by its weight. The string slipped, and the fabric unfolded. Gold spilled into his palm. Cold. Heavy. Real. The coins clinked together with a sound that did not belong in a junkyard. It belonged in castles, in wars, in the hands of men long dead. Michael froze. The beam of his flashlight wavered. His reflection shone in the dull gleam of the coins. A tired man, eyes wide, holding history in his scarred hand. He dropped to his knees, digging deeper. A goblet surfaced, tarnished but ornate, its stem alive with delicate engravings. A necklace, chain thin as spider silk, a dark jewel pulsing in the light. Paintings wrapped in cracked paper, colors still fierce despite the dust. His breath came in ragged bursts. This wasn't junk. This was treasure. Yet as wonder filled him, another feeling crawled up his spine. Unease. As if each object carried eyes. As if the past was watching. Michael sat back, the gold warm in his palm. His head buzzed with questions. Who had hidden this? Why here, in a false shell of rust? Why bury wealth in a graveyard of metal? He looked at the crates still sealed, row after row, waiting. Each one could hold more. Coins. Jewels. Secrets. For the first time in years, his life wasn't empty. It was terrifyingly full. The sun sank unnoticed. The yard fell quiet, machine silenced, men gone home. But Michael stayed, kneeling in the stale chamber, surrounded by echoes of another age. At last, he dragged himself up, sealing the hatch, locking the silence behind him. But the weight of the gold followed. In his hand. In his chest. In his dreams already waiting. He walked home in darkness, a secret clutched tight, his shadow long on the pavement. Michael Harris had opened the first crate. And the world he knew had already begun to crumble. Michael couldn't keep his hands still. At the breakfast table, his fingers drummed against the wood. Rachel noticed, though she said nothing. Her silence was no longer just weariness, it was suspicion. James sat across from him, scrolling on his phone, earbuds dangling, ignoring his father as if he were a stranger. The gold burned in Michael's pocket, heavier than coins should be. He hadn't dared bring much home, only 2 pieces, hidden deep in his jacket lining. But they felt alive, pulsing, demanding. Like they wanted to be seen. He left the apartment before Rachel could ask where he was going. The air outside bit cold against his cheeks, but he barely noticed. His world had narrowed to a single point, the container. The yard opened before him. Men joked, machines shrieked, the day began the same as always. But for Michael, nothing was the same. The container was all he saw. It crouched in its corner, a rusted beast with secrets in its belly. It waited. He wasted no time. Tools in hand, he ducked inside the hatch again. The stale air welcomed him, heavy with dust and years. The beam of his flashlight danced across the crates, those patient coffins of wood. He chose another, the closest to the left wall. The crowbar bit, the wood moaned. Splinters cracked, nails screamed. The lid gave. Inside, not gold this time. Not jewels. But a stack of books, leather covers cracked and curling, their spines embossed with faded gold lettering. The air smelled of ink and rot, a forgotten library. Michael lifted one carefully. The pages whispered as he opened it, the script tight and slanted, a language half familiar. Names. Numbers. Ledgers. Diaries. He couldn't tell. But tucked between the pages was something else. A folded paper, brittle, yellowed. He opened it with shaking fingers. A symbol stared back at him. Drawn in thick black ink, sharp and deliberate. A circle. Inside it, an inverted triangle. At its center, a mark like an eye. Michael's stomach clenched. The image burned. Not decorative. Not casual. It was a seal. And beneath it, words in English, faint but clear. Not to be broken. His breath caught. The silence of the chamber pressed heavier than ever. The gold had thrilled him. The jewels had dazzled. But this felt like a warning. He shoved the paper back between the pages, heart hammering. His flashlight skated across the wall of the chamber, and for the first time, he noticed something he had missed. The steel wasn't smooth everywhere. Near the floor, hidden by shadows, lines were etched. He crouched, wiping dust away with his sleeve. Symbols. The same circle triangle eye carved into the metal. Over and over, scratched by hand, as if whoever built this place wanted the message repeated until time itself gave up. Michael's chest tightened. He had thought he'd found treasure. But treasure doesn't warn you to stay away. Treasure doesn't breathe warnings through the years. The rest of the day blurred. He went through the motions at work, but his mind was locked on the symbol. The paper. The phrase. Rachel called him in the evening. Her voice was clipped, asking if he'd be late again. He lied, said he was busy with overtime. She sighed, said nothing more, and hung up. The distance between them widened like a crack in stone. Back inside the hatch, after the others had gone home, Michael sat on the cold steel floor, staring at the books and crates. He lit another flashlight and left it on the ground, the beam casting long shadows across the walls. The symbols stared back. Dozens of them, scratched into steel, old but defiant. He felt surrounded, judged, tested. He picked up the book again, running his hand over the leather, the edges crumbling under his touch. His eyes fell to the warning once more, not to be broken. He whispered aloud, voice raw. Too late. When he finally climbed out into the night, the yard was empty. The city hummed in the distance. But Michael felt no relief. He couldn't shake the sense that the box had shifted. Not the metal, not the crates, but something inside. something that had stirred when he read the words. The container no longer felt like discovery. It felt like a pact. That night, Michael dreamed of the symbol. The circle. The triangle. The eye staring into him, unblinking. It glowed on the inside of his eyelids, etched into his skull. When he woke, sweat plastered his shirt to his back. Rachel slept with her face turned to the wall. James' door was shut tight. Michael lay there in the dark, whispering the words again. Not to be broken. But it already was. The days lost their shape. Work. Home. Morning. Night. It all bled into one grey smear. Except for the container. That box cut through everything, like a knife through fog. It waited. Always. Every clang of steel in the yard, every hiss of the grinder, every cough of exhaust, none of it mattered. Michael heard only the silence in the corner. He told himself he'd open just one more crate. Then he'd stop. Sell what he could. Buy Rachel some peace. Give James something better than second-hand clothes. But he didn't believe himself. The pull was too strong. That morning he slipped inside the hatch with shaking hands. The air was heavier than before, the dust thicker, like the chamber had exhaled in his absence and now wanted him back. The beam of his flashlight swept across the crates. He chose one at random. The crowbar screamed, wood splintered, nails shrieked. Inside, velvet-lined boxes. He opened one and froze. A pistol. Old. Black metal dulled by time. Its grip wrapped in cracked leather, stamped with that same circle triangle eye. Michael's breath caught. His hand trembled as he reached toward it. Cold bit his fingertips before he even touched. That's when he heard it. Not the scrape of his tool. Not the groan of wood. Something else. Breath. Not his. Low. Drawn out. Steady. He swung the flashlight toward the far end of the chamber. Shadows jerked. Dust swirled. Empty. Hello. His voice cracked, swallowed by the steel. No answer. He wiped sweat from his brow, forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to him. Imagination. That's all. Just nerves. He turned back to the pistol. Lifted it. The weight surprised him. Real. Heavy. Purposeful. He aimed it at the crates in front of him, hands shaking. That's when he saw them. Two pale impressions in the dust near the far wall. Like knees pressed into the floor. Fresh. Michael stumbled back, nearly dropping the gun. His flashlight beam jittered across the chamber, slicing through shadows. The dust danced like smoke. No one there. And yet the prints glowed faintly, as if still warm. He scrambled up through the hatch, chest heaving, the cold night air rushing into his lungs like salvation. The yard was empty, silent, indifferent. He locked the hatch behind him with trembling hands, as though that could keep whatever was inside from leaving. That night he told himself not to go back. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at Rachel's tired face, James's blank expression. He could say it now. I found something. I'm scared. But the words never came. Instead, he muttered excuses. Late shift. Extra work. Rachel didn't believe him, but she was too tired to argue. James didn't even look up. When the house slept, Michael crept into the garage. He laid the pistol on the workbench under the lamp. The symbol stared back at him from the grip, dark and sharp. He ran his thumb over it, and felt the same thing he'd felt when the box hissed open. A presence. Not alive. Not dead. Something in between. The silence of the garage deepened. Then came that sound again. Breath. Slow. Steady. Not his own. Michael spun, lamp swaying, shadows jumping. Empty. He turned back to the pistol. But the dust on the bench. It shifted, as if something unseen had just leaned across the wood. Michael Harris was no longer alone. Not in the yard. Not in the chamber. Not in his own home. The box had followed him, and it had begun to breathe. Michael woke with the taste of iron on his tongue, as though he'd bitten down on rust in his sleep. The ceiling above him blurred, the cracks swimming in and out of focus. Rachel's side of the bed was empty. James's door was shut tight. The apartment hummed with silence. But in his chest, something pounded harder than his own heartbeat. A rhythm not his. A rhythm that belonged to the box. He dragged himself through the motions of the morning. Coffee cold. Bread tasteless. Shoes heavy. On the bus to the yard, every face felt wrong. Too still. Too watchful. A man in a grey coat stared a second too long. A woman whispered into her phone, glancing at him twice. Michael shifted in his seat, palms sweating. The world had begun to notice. The container squatted in its corner, patient and silent. But as Michael stepped closer, the air felt different. Sharper. Like static before a storm. He slid inside the hatch, flashlight trembling in his grip. Dust curled in lazy spirals, but it didn't fall the way it should. It floated. Hung in the air like it was underwater. The crates loomed around him, lined up like jurors. The pistol lay where he'd left it. But now there were 3 fresh impressions in the dust beside it. As if unseen hands had knelt there in prayer. Michael's chest tightened. He wanted to run. But something stronger forced him forward. The chamber darkened. Not from the light failing, but as though the walls themselves drew closer, swallowing glow. Michael raised the flashlight. Its beam seemed weaker, eaten by the black. The symbols carved into the steel flickered. Not glowing, but shifting. As though the lines writhed beneath the surface, twisting into shapes he couldn't hold in his eyes. He stumbled back, shoulder slamming into a crate. The lid cracked open. Photographs spilled out. Faces staring, eyes wide, lips caught mid-cry. Men. Women. Children. All marked on the backs with the same circle triangle eye. Michael gasped. The chamber seemed to inhale with him. The floor shuddered. Faint at first, then stronger. Crates rattled. Coins clinked in muffled echoes. The hatch above him slammed shut with a metallic clang. He spun, flashlight beam jumping wildly. The bolt wheel twisted on its own. The hatch sealed. He was locked in. The air grew thinner. His chest heaved. Each breath scraped, ragged and shallow. He fell to his knees, clutching the pistol though it felt useless. A whisper slid across the chamber. Not words. Just sound. A sigh. A laugh. 1,000 voices tangled into one. Michael pressed his palms to his ears, but it burrowed deeper, inside his skull. The faces in the photographs seemed to shift, mouths opening wider, eyes hollowing into voids. He staggered, slammed against another crate. This one burst. Letters scattered across the floor, pages brittle and yellow. The words blurred, but one line burned clear in his vision. To open is to inherit. The chamber shook harder. Dust rained from the seams. The flashlight flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed him whole. Michael shouted. Anger, fear, desperation. His voice ricocheted, warped, returned to him deeper, colder. Something moved. Not dust. Not air. Something heavy, circling him just beyond reach. He raised the pistol, trembling. The breath came again, slow and steady, directly behind him. He spun, pulled the trigger. The explosion deafened. The flash lit the chamber in white for a single instant. And in that instant, he saw them. Figures. Kneeling. Dozens. Their heads bowed, their shapes blurred, faceless but watching. Then darkness again. Silence. The pistol smoked in his hand. His ears rang. And the hatch above clicked. Unlocked. As though whatever had tested him had finished for now. Michael stumbled out into the night air, gasping, his body shaking with exhaustion. The yard was deserted, machines cold, stars sharp above him. But he knew the truth now. The container was no vault. It was no tomb. It was a trial. And by opening it, he had accepted. Michael didn't go home that night. He couldn't. He sat slumped against the side of the container, lungs aching, pistol still warm in his hand. The yard was silent. Too silent. Every clang, every laugh, every hiss of torches had bled away with the daylight, leaving only him, the rust, and the ghosts. He stared at the hatch. It looked the same as before. Rusted, scarred, indifferent. But he knew better now. The container wasn't empty. It wasn't treasure. It was something alive. Something that tested him. And tonight, he had been judged. By dawn, he forced himself back inside. Not because he wanted to, but because the thought of not knowing would eat him alive. The air inside was different now. Cooler. Thinner. Like it had shed skin in the night. He crouched where the letters had scattered across the floor. Pages yellowed, edges crumbling. Ink faded, but legible. He gathered them into trembling hands and began to read. The handwriting was sharp, precise, military, not personal, not tender, but official. Orders. The words bled through in fragments. Containment project approved. Assets relocated. Heirs compromised, record sealed. Final trust established. Inheritor unknown. Michael's mouth went dry. It wasn't just treasure. It wasn't just history. It was property, deliberately hidden, deliberately guarded, deliberately erased. The phrase returned in his mind. To open is to inherit. He flipped another page. This one written in a different hand. Slanted. Urgent. Not official. Personal. If you read this, it means the vault has been broken. What lies inside is not yours to take. You are chosen, not by blood, but by will. Guard it, or it will unmake you. The words blurred as his eyes burned. Chosen. Him. A man no one remembered, no one respected. A man whose own family barely looked at him. Chosen? The thought tasted like poison and salvation at the same time. He rifled deeper. Found a sealed envelope. The paper was brittle, wax seal cracked but intact. The mark pressed into it made his stomach twist. The circle. The triangle. The eye. He broke the seal with a thumb that wouldn't stop shaking. Inside was a single sheet. Not instructions. Not orders. A list. Names. Dozens of them. Some crossed out in thick, dark strokes. Some underlined. Beside them, dates. Some from a century ago. Some recent. Too recent. Michael's own last name sat at the bottom. Harris. Beside it, no date. No mark. Just space, waiting. The chamber seemed to close in. The faces from the photographs stared sharper, as though daring him to claim what wasn't his. The pistol weighed heavier in his grip, not as a weapon but as a signature, proof that he was already part of this. Michael shoved the papers back into the crate, chest heaving. The truth seared through him. This wasn't fortune. It wasn't accident. It was legacy. And somehow, impossibly, it was his. That night at home, he tried to act normal. He sat at the table. Rachel pushed food around her plate. James scrolled in silence. The apartment hummed with distance. Michael opened his mouth. Closed it again. What could he say? I've inherited ghosts. There's a vault under my skin now. Instead, he told them nothing. But Rachel's eyes caught him, sharp, suspicious. She knew he was lying, though she didn't know what about. James wouldn't even look at him. When the house finally fell quiet, Michael crept to the garage. He laid the envelope on the workbench, the list of names glaring up at him. His fingers hovered over the bottom line. Over his family's name. He whispered it aloud. Chosen. And for the first time, he felt it. The weight not of treasure, not of gold, but of history pressing down on his shoulders. The vault wasn't just a secret. It was a torch. And it had been passed to him. Michael Harris wasn't just a man anymore. He was an inheritor. A keeper. A prisoner of a legacy that demanded everything. And the trial had only just begun. The list haunted him. Every name. Every date. And his own surname etched at the bottom, waiting to be claimed like a gravestone without a body. Michael folded the paper back into its envelope, but the words wouldn't fold out of his mind. He barely ate. He barely slept. Every sound in the apartment scraped against his nerves. The tick of the clock. The sigh of the fridge. Even Rachel's footsteps across the kitchen floor felt too loud, too knowing. He caught her staring once, her eyes narrowed, lips pressed thin. She wanted to ask, but she didn't. And that silence was worse than questions. At the yard, things shifted. The men who had laughed at him weeks ago no longer joked. They glanced, whispered when he walked by. One or two lingered near the corner, pretending to check scrap, but their eyes cut toward the container. Michael's skin crawled. Had someone followed him inside? Had anyone seen what he'd taken home? That night, he found the garage door unlocked. He was certain he'd bolted it. The lamp was tilted, the stack of envelopes shuffled. The pistol wasn't where he'd left it. Panic burned through him. He tore through boxes, tools, shelves, until he found the gun wedged beneath the top. It hadn't been moved far, but it had been touched. Someone knew. The next day, the boss cornered him. "You've been working late." Not a question. A statement. His tone was flat, but his eyes lingered too long. "You find something worth staying for?" Michael froze. Heat rushed up his neck. The boss smirked. "Relax. Just curious." But the way his voice bent around the word curious made Michael's stomach knot. That night he returned to the container. The hatch will bore fresh scratches, bright against the old rust. Someone had tried to open it. Recently. Inside, the chamber felt colder. The crate seemed rearranged, just slightly, angles different, dust disturbed. Michael's pulse pounded as he moved deeper, the flashlight jerking across symbols that seemed to leer at him. In the far corner, something new waited. Not treasure. Not relics. A message, carved into the dust with a fingertip. "Not yours." Michael stumbled back, breath tearing out of him. He spun the beam across the chamber. Empty. But the dust still hung in the air, curling, unsettled. Someone had been here. Maybe still was. He sealed the hatch, hands slick with sweat. But paranoia chased him out into the night. Every step home felt followed. Every passing car slowed. Every shadow stretched too long. By the time he reached the apartment, his nerves were shredded raw. Rachel sat waiting, arms crossed, face pale with anger. "Where were you?" He muttered something about extra shifts, but her eyes locked onto him like knives. "You're lying. You've been lying for weeks." James's door slammed shut down the hall. Even his son had stopped pretending. Michael sat at the table long after Rachel left the room. His hand pressed against his pocket, feeling the shape of a coin he had kept, hidden. It burned against his thigh. Not comfort. Not wealth. A curse. The container was no longer his secret. Someone else wanted it. Someone had already stepped inside. And now, his family was cracking under the weight of silence. Betrayal hung in the air, thick and certain. Michael Harris was no longer just the keeper of the box. He was the hunted. The night fell too fast. The sky turned black as if someone had snuffed the sun with one breath. Michael's chest throbbed with a weight he could no longer carry. Every shadow outside the apartment window looked like a figure waiting. Every noise in the stairwell sounded like a footstep meant for him. Rachel refused to meet his eyes. James stayed locked in his room. The home was no longer a home. It was a waiting room for something inevitable. Michael couldn't stay. Not here. Not with them. If someone was coming, he would not let his family pay the price. He took the pistol, slipped it into his coat, and walked into the cold. The yard was darker than usual. The floodlights that normally bathed the metal mountains in harsh white were dead. Only the moon carved pale edges on the twisted beams. The container loomed in its corner, larger than ever, its rusted skin almost pulsing. Michael felt eyes on him. From the dark piles of scrap. From behind trucks. From everywhere. Then, movement. A silhouette broke free from the shadows. One of the men from the yard. Then another. And another. 3 of them. Faces familiar, but eyes hungry. They didn't joke this time. No laughter. No mocking. Just the silence of predators circling. "Step away, Harris," one said. His voice was low, steady. Not a request. An order. Michael tightened his grip on the pistol. His voice cracked. "It's not yours." The second man sneered. "You think it's yours? You don't even know what you've opened." The third stepped forward, crowbar in hand. "Give us the key." Michael's breath caught. The key? They looked at him as though he were a child. As though he didn't understand. And maybe he didn't. The hatch behind him groaned. By itself. The wheel turned, bolts loosening one by one, metal screaming in protest. The men froze, eyes wide. The chamber exhaled, stale air rushing out like a sigh too long held. Darkness poured from inside, thicker than shadow, swallowing moonlight. The symbols etched into the steel flickered, alive, twisting like snakes beneath the surface. The men stepped back, fear breaking their hunger. But Michael didn't move. He couldn't. The container had chosen him. And now it was awake. Voices filled the yard. Not from the men. Not from Michael. From the hatch. A chorus layered with centuries of whispers, too many to count, too many to separate. Each word scraped his skull raw. To open is to inherit. To guard is to suffer. To betray is to perish. The men bolted. Crowbar clanged against gravel, abandoned in their panic. Their shadows fled into the steel labyrinth, swallowed whole by the dark. Michael stood alone. Except he wasn't alone. Figures rose behind the crates. The kneeling shapes he had glimpsed before. This time clearer. Hollow faces, blurred outlines, heads bowed in eternal silence. Guardians. Or prisoners. Or both. They moved without sound, turning toward him as one. Dozens of eyes, empty sockets, endless voids, fixed on Michael. His knees buckled. The pistol slipped from his hand, clattering against steel. The whispers surged. Louder. Sharper. Until they were no longer whispers but a command carved into the marrow of his bones. Choose. Michael's chest heaved. Sweat dripped into his eyes. The hatch widened. Darkness beckoned. He understood now. This wasn't about treasure. It never had been. The box was a chain, passed from name to name, generation to generation. Not fortune, burden. Not wealth, custody. And he was next. He reached down, fingers closing around the pistol. His reflection shimmered in its dark barrel. A tired man, hollowed by years, now hollowed by destiny. He raised it. Not at the men who had fled. Not at Rachel. Not at James. At the container. At the hatch yawning wider. At the legacy clawing for him. Not mine, he rasped. Not anymore. He pulled the trigger. The explosion cracked the night apart. Light seared through the chamber, through the symbols, through the faces staring at him. The sound rolled across the yard like thunder breaking chains. And then, silence. Michael collapsed to his knees, ears ringing, chest burning. The hatch stood still. The wheel frozen. The whispers gone. The night held its breath. The gunshot still echoed in Michael's skull long after the sound had died. The hatch no longer moved. The symbols had gone still, their shifting lines frozen like scars. The air hung heavy, stale, but silent. Too silent. Michael knelt in the gravel, pistol slipping from his trembling hand. His chest heaved, his throat raw, every nerve screaming. But the whispers were gone. The breath of the container, gone. The figures, gone. Only emptiness remained. The yard around him was motionless. The floodlights stayed dead. The machines slumbered like corpses. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then fell quiet. Michael pushed himself upright. His legs wobbled. His vision swam. He half expected the ground to open and drag him down. But nothing came. No voices. No shadows. No judgment. He staggered toward the hatch, pressing a palm against the cold metal. It didn't hum anymore. It didn't breathe. It was just steel again. By dawn, Michael was home. Rachel sat at the table, eyes red from a night without sleep. James hovered near the door, backpack slung over his shoulder, expression guarded. They looked at him like strangers. And Michael, for the first time, didn't try to lie. I ended it, he whispered. His voice cracked. You don't need to know how. Only that it's over. Rachel's lips parted as if to argue, to demand more, but she stopped. She saw the ruin in his eyes, the exhaustion carved deeper than any scar. She turned back to her coffee, silent. James slipped out without a word. Michael showered. The water ran red-brown from rust and blood, swirling down the drain. He scrubbed until his skin burned, but the weight didn't leave. Not fully. When he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The man staring back wasn't the weary laborer from before, nor the desperate treasure hunter, nor the terrified prisoner. He was something else now. Something forged in silence and fear. A keeper. Even if the box had fallen quiet, its mark lived in him. That night, he returned to the garage. The pistol lay on the bench, cold and dark. The coin glimmered faintly under the lamp. The envelope with the list of names sat untouched, Michael's surname still waiting, empty beside it. He traced his finger over the space next to Harris. For a moment, he thought he felt warmth. Like the paper itself remembered him. He pulled his hand away, shaking. Morning came again. Normal. Too normal. Rachel left for work. James for school. The apartment hummed with life as though nothing had changed. But Michael knew. He carried the silence with him now. The faces, the voices, the symbols, they lived in his bones. The container might never open again, but the inheritance was his. Not of gold, not of fortune, but of weight, responsibility, and the knowledge that some secrets are never buried. He stood at the window, watching the city wake. Cars rolled past. People hurried to their jobs. Life moved on. Michael whispered to himself, voice low, final. The price wasn't the treasure. It was me. He closed the blinds, turned away, and walked into the new morning.